What if I told you you could turn any exercise into a glute building exercise? I found 5 simple techniques, all backed by research, that force your body into a more glute dominant movement pattern. To put them to the test, I went into an exercise science lab, strapped EMG sensors to my glutes, and squatted my way through each technique one by one. By the end, once I'd stacked all 5 together, my glute activation had jumped by over 65%. Same exercise, same weight, with a completely different output. So if you've been training hard, but your glutes still aren't growing, this is for you. The first technique is belly bracing. Belly bracing is where you stiffen your midsection to stabilize your pelvis. Because the glutes anchor onto the pelvis, that pelvic stability gives them a solid base to contract from, which allows them to activate harder. Think of it like running on the sand versus running on the road. Because the road is more stable, you can push off harder and get more forward drive, allowing you to run faster. But there's another reason belly bracing is so effective for glute activation. The core muscles connect directly to the glute muscles through a layer of connective tissue in the lower back called the thoracolumbar fascia. When the core muscles engage, it increases tension through those connection points, triggering a stronger co-contraction between the core and the glutes. One study actually found that when the core was activated, glute activity more than doubled. And when we put belly bracing to the test in our EMG lab session, my glute activation jumped by 27.5% compared to my baseline. While my glute activity may not have doubled like it did for those in the study, I'll take 27% increase from such a simple technique any day. Why do you think the world's best powerlifters belly brace before every heavy lift? You'll see them take a big deep breath into their belly and then stiffen their midsection before moving the bar. Many wear weightlifting belts because it gives them something to brace against, allowing them to engage their core muscles even harder. This technique helps them generate maximum force through the hips and maintain good positions throughout their lift. Here's a simple method you can use to brace your core for any exercise. Before each rep, poke your fingers deep into your abdomen, then contract your abs to force your fingers back out. You should now be braced and ready to move. Just make sure that when you use this technique, you don't flex or extend your spine. It must remain in neutral. Right, onto the second technique, which is to activate your lats while you exercise. The lat connects diagonally to the glute on the opposite side through a thick layer of fascia in the lower back. This connection is called the posterior oblique sling, and its purpose is to allow the two muscles to work together as a unit to produce a greater force output. Why do you think your arms swing every time you walk and run? During the swing phase of the gait cycle, the lats on the one side and the glutes on the opposite side are pulled apart, stretching the fascia that connects them like a slingshot being drawn back. Then during push-off, that stored tension snaps back, driving a powerful contraction through both muscles simultaneously. This is the posterior oblique sling at work, and it's what gives your stride its force and efficiency. You can introduce this arm swinging motion as a glute boosting technique in any lower body exercise where the arms are free, like lunges, step-ups, and single-arm kettlebell movements. In our internal testing on the step-up, adding an arm swing not only increased glute activity, but also reduced quad involvement. That suggests that an active posterior oblique sling distributes effort more efficiently through the limbs. But what about exercises where your arms aren't free, like the back squat? Can you replicate that lat to glute connection without needing to swing the arms? That's exactly what I wanted to find out. So in our EMG lab session, I tried activating the sling isometrically by pulling the bar hard into my traps, keeping my lats engaged throughout the entire lift. But it didn't work. My glute activation actually dropped slightly compared to core bracing alone. Now, we can't say for certain why this didn't work. We'd need more people testing this out to draw any real conclusions. But my theory is that the sling might need that alternating stretch and release to actually fire. During a squat, both lats are locked on symmetrically. There's no slingshot effect. They're just holding static tension, and that might not be enough to trigger the fascial connection. So for now, we'd recommend using the sling where it shines, in free arm movements like running, step-ups, lunges, and various single arm kettlebell movements. How to effectively tap into it during bilateral lifts is something we definitely want to explore further. But based on this initial test, pulling the bar down during the squat didn't deliver. The third technique stabilizes the arches in the feet, which is vital to set a solid base of support for the glutes to contract powerfully. It's called short foot, and here's how to do it. Before every rep, press your toes into the ground, not curling them, pressing them down. You should feel the muscles on the underside of your foot activate and the arches lift. Here's why it works for the glutes. When you press your toes into the ground, the muscles that connect from the toes into the arch activate, helping the arch maintain its height and keep the foot stable under load. And when the arch is held up, everything above, including the shin, knee, thigh bone, and pelvis, is supported in good alignment. With the pelvis in a stable neutral position, the glutes attached to it have the mechanical advantage they need to contract powerfully. That's why a 2021 study found that people with higher arches had significantly more glute activation than those with flat arches. You can apply the short foot technique to almost any exercise. In a lunge, set the short foot on the front leg before you descend. In a single leg deadlift, lock the standing foot first. In the squat, apply a little pressure into the ground on the descent, but then coming out of the bottom, press your toes as hard as you can into the ground to stand back up. This technique delivered the single biggest jump in glute activation we saw in our entire EMG lab session. It spiked by 30.1% over the previous protocol. What this test shows is what we've been saying in our content for years, that you can't have powerful glutes without a strong base below them. But the glute gains we get from the feet don't stop at the arch. The fourth technique is to wear a pair of silicone toe spacers. Silicone spacers help the toes align with the metatarsals, which widens the foot's base of support, and a wider base improves arch stability. But when the toes are misaligned, like in the case of bunions and bunionettes, the base narrows, the arches lose support, and the foot collapses into overpronation with each step. That's why studies have found a direct link between toe misalignment and flat feet. And when the arch drops, everything above it, including the shin, knee, thigh, and pelvis, fall out of position, causing the glutes to lose their mechanical advantage to contract powerfully. Now, permanently fixing toe alignment may take months or even years. That's why silicone spacers are so useful. They realign the toes immediately, giving you quick access to the upstream benefits of better toe splay. In our internal EMG testing of the goblet squat and the step up, wearing silicone toe spacers increased glute activity in both exercises. However, when we tested toe spacers during the back squat, we actually saw a slight drop in glute activation, about 7% below the previous technique. At first it surprised me, but once I thought about what happened during the test, it made sense. I was wearing barefoot shoes, but they weren't wide enough to comfortably fit the silicone spacers inside. My toes felt restricted and I was struggling to use them properly throughout the set, whereas in the previous tests on the goblet squat and step up, I was barefoot. Obviously, I had to go back to the university to test my theory that shoes were the cause of us seeing a negative result in the toe spacer test. This time, I measured the effect of silicone toe spacers on glute activity under 3 conditions. Barefoot shoes without toe spacers, which served as my baseline, barefoot shoes with toe spacers, recreating the original test, and toe spacers without shoes, removing any potential restriction on the toes. Compared to baseline, the condition without shoes increased glute activity by 1.9%, and compared to toe spacers worn inside the shoes, it increased glute activity by 7.9%. Now, I should mention that I don't have any toe misalignment, which is probably why the toe spacers only increased my glute activity slightly. But in someone with toe misalignment like a bunion, I'd expect realigning the toes to have a much bigger effect. Nevertheless, the results supported my theory. Toe spacers can increase glute activity, but if the shoes do not have enough room to accommodate them, that benefit gets lost. All right, onto the final technique. Grab a resistance band for this. A 2020 study found that placing resistance bands around the knees during barbell back squats increased glute activity by 23%. That's because the band creates an inward pull at the knees. To keep the knees from caving in, the glutes have to then counter that pull through hip abduction and external rotation. And the stronger the band's inward tension, the harder the glutes fire to hold the knees out. But the study also found a problem. Increasing band tension around the knees caused some of the participants to collapse into knee valgus. Under load, that's a position you want to avoid. But with a bit more digging, I found 2 studies showing that when the band was placed lower down the leg, glute activation increased even more. Outside of better glute activation, placing the bands lower avoids pulling the knees into valgus, so you get the glute activation benefits without the injury risk. We actually verified this in our lab sessions, where I squatted with the band at both the knees and the ankles. The ankle placement produced higher glute activation than the knee placement. It's super cool to see our own data confirmed with what the research suggested. I also prefer the band around the ankles because it provides the added benefit of foot arch training. When the band is at the ankles, it creates a gentle pronation force on the feet. So you have to actively stabilize and supinate to keep the arches lifted and toes aligned. This gives us even more confidence in recommending the ankles as the go-to band placement. Resistance bands can be added to everything from deadlifts, wall balls, overhead presses, or even farmer carries. To see the bands we use, scan this QR code or go to bfs.fit. So what's the final verdict? What did the EMG data actually show when everything was stacked together? Well, from baseline to the fully stacked protocol, my glute activation went from 0.041 millivolts to 0.068 millivolts, which is an increase of 65.4%. That's a 2/3 jump in glute output without changing the exercise, the weight, or the tempo, just by changing how I set up and engage my body in each rep. And remember, 2 of the 5 techniques didn't even contribute positively in this test. The technique I used to activate the posterior oblique sling wasn't suited to the bilateral squat, and the toe spaces were compromised by shoes that were too narrow. So if just 3 of the 5 techniques working optimally produced a 65% gain, imagine what all 5 could do when everything is dialed in. So clearly these techniques work, but it's important to note that they work best when your body has the foundation to support them. For instance, if your hips are chronically tight, they physically block hip extension, preventing full glute contraction. Belly bracing alone won't compensate for that. If your ankles are stiff, you can't get deep enough into a squat for the glutes to stretch and fire. If your feet are intrinsically weak, short foot activation can only do so much. The techniques in this video give you the tools for better glute activation, but a well-functioning body is what lets you use them. That's exactly what we help you achieve at the Barefoot Strength Academy. When you join, the first thing you'll do is take our screening test, which assesses your body's functionality based on 10 research-backed skills: hip mobility, ankle mobility, core stability, foot strength, toe alignment, and more. Each skill then has its own set of follow-along workouts already built in and progressed for you to fix those weaknesses. And you're not doing it alone. Every workout has a comment section where members can ask questions and get direct guidance from us. There's also an active community chat where you can share your struggles and wins with other members. We don't leave you to figure it out on your own. We coach you through it. In conclusion, the path to better glute activation is simple. Build your body's foundation first to remove any glute obstructions, then stack these 5 glute activation techniques on top of it. That way, your glutes become the dominant engine in every movement. Before signing off, I want to give a big shout out to the sports lab at UCLan University, Cyprus for helping us conduct this experiment. It's the university I graduated from, and they have a great team of top-class researchers who are always willing to accommodate us. See you in the next one. Cheers.